Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. I have over here a campaign as the High Elves, a bit modded, things like Recruit Defeated Legendary Lords and also the Phoenix Core mod, which I would strongly recommend if you're looking to play a High Elf campaign. And what I want to talk about in this video is the subject of Doomstacks. There is a perception among certain sections of the community that Doomstacking is not good, and that unit caps would be a great system if Creative Assembly implemented it. It's certainly not necessarily a very large portion of the community, but you keep hearing this. Like when Gorband Ironclaw came out as a Legendary Lord, and I said that, well, he isn't especially great as a Legendary Lord. There were people, well, he forces variety, and that's better than Doomstacking. And my reaction to all of that is, why would you ever Doomstack? In any campaign, as anyone, really. It is a highly inefficient way of using your resources. Because you gotta understand, you're not playing in a campaign properly. If you're trying to win a campaign in the most efficient way possible, I'm not talking about like all the things you can get up to. That's a different discussion. Do what you want. But if we're talking about campaigns and a challenge of a campaign, this campaign is on Legendary very hard, the AI stats modifier to max. And I found Morathi in this campaign. Hell, I defeated one of Valkia's armies, and the rest of Valkia just kind of fled over here. Truth be told, I didn't fight her. But if you're playing any campaign in this game as any Legendary Lord of any race, even races that have a very powerful economy, Doomstacking is one of the worst decisions you could make. Even as Orion, literally. Even if you're playing as Orion, who has free armies, Doomstacking is absolutely not worth your time. There are a number of reasons behind that, but it comes down to how the game works. So let's go into the details over here and why I think unit caps don't work, and Doomstacking is not really a great idea to pursue in your campaign. Again, do what you want in your campaign. You want to make 19 Thunder Barges, go ahead. 19 Thunder Barges is not an efficient way of using resources. Because the meat of a campaign, the portion of a campaign where there is the most amount of challenge, even if you have something like an ultimate endgame crisis, but even then, Doomstacking wouldn't necessarily be worth it. But with those exceptions, the meat of a campaign is going to take place in the early game. Basically, the most challenging portion of the campaign where there's the highest stakes, it's always going to take place early on. Because look at this campaign as Ariel. What are the challenges of this campaign? It ain't Malekith. It ain't Nagorond. That might be a long objective to destroy all of the Dark Elf factions, but that is not the principal challenge over here. The principal challenge is dealing with Nakari relatively quickly in this campaign, dealing with Noctilus, and dealing with Morathi. That is it. How long that takes you, that's a different discussion. But those are all early game challenges, regardless of whether or not you're hyper-aggressive or not. Or a mix of those, right? I imagine most people are not necessarily sitting on their ass for dozens of turns, but they also don't necessarily go crazy on it. But that is the principal challenge. And that means you're dealing with things within those first 30, 40 turns. Well, within the first 30, 40 turns, as a lot of the races, not all of them, Skaven are an exception, for instance, Chaos Dwarfs can be an exception, etc. But as the vast majority of races in the game, when you're talking about 30, 40 turns, basically what you're talking about is units below tier 3. And beyond the tier requirement, which certainly is especially bad for the High Elves, because with the High Elf roster, there's a lot of the tier 3 units are just not worth recruiting. Even in this case, as a Lariel, where you can get Sisters of Avalorn at tier 3 as opposed to tier 4, it's just kind of not worth it to recruit them. But in most campaigns, you're going to be limited in terms of the tiers. But beyond the tiers, there's also the economic aspect. Because yes, you could, for instance, in this example, say for instance, you get the Greater Grove, you get a bunch of these handmaiden galleries, you get cavalry, you could do that. But the problem with doing that is recruiting, building all that up, recruiting all those units, is going to be a costly effort that is going to slow you down. because you're not building economic buildings. There are a limited number of building slots for all the issues that particular system causes. And so the best way to build up your empire is to focus on a couple of recruitment buildings, usually the kind of stuff that you almost certainly want to use in hero capacity buildings, and then primarily focus on growth and economy buildings, and also control buildings if you need them. That is the best way of building up your empire. That is the best way to develop your provinces for the most part. Going for a wider unit variety, or going for the buildings that would even allow you to, say, Doomstack dragons, or Doomstack, arcane phoenixes, all that, is just not an efficient way of using resources. Simple as that. You might do it in a province, but then you have all the units only being able to recruit, all those high-end units only being able to be recruited from a single settlement. So that is the first factor. The limitations of a campaign because of the campaign pacing, and even in a longer campaign, when you're conquering a lot of territory, you typically want to develop the territories you conquer into more economy, and have a couple of settlements or 1 or 2 provinces that are dedicated for recruitment. And then the other thing you want to do in these provinces, focus on hero capacity, because you can recruit units from a single province, but you need multiple provinces to really increase hero capacity, as most races. In fact, if you're playing something as a Skaven, you might build certain buildings in certain provinces just purely to get more heroes. I'm not talking about hero doomstacking here, by the way, or hero stacking. I'm literally just talking having 1 hero of each type per army. That is not stacking. That is a reasonable course of action. But you end up in a situation where you realize that both from a building perspective and an economic perspective and a campaign pacing perspective, the best thing to do is not to get the highest possible tier of units, but to get many armies of cheap units that you can recruit relatively quickly and on the fly. Because if an army requires you to get, tier 3 unit, well, you can recruit that in your original province, but you probably won't be able to recruit them on the field. And we can lose units. And so the best thing to do from a lot of perspectives is not to get something like High Elven Dragons. The best thing to do is to get 4 armies like this. Because these are 4 armies, yes, Feanor. This is the most effective, well, minus Regiment Renown there, but this is the most effective High Elven armor, or army, or something like this. I actually recruited this fairly early on. I might want to switch it with some siege. But the army Teclis has here, hell, even remove the White Lions and get more spearmen and archers, is genuinely the most effective High Elven army. And every faction has something like this, a crap stack, if you will. For Greenskins at the moment, it's Biggins and Orc Archers, or Biggins and Goblin Archers, or not Goblin Archers, with maybe some Stone Trolls. But essentially, a relatively cheap army that you can mass. And you don't just get 1 of these armies, you get 4 of these armies, you get 5 of these armies. Getting 5 of these armies is kind of the limit of what I can afford. Or, in this case, I replaced the basic High Elven Spearmen with Silvern Guard, get archers with light armor, because you have 50 armor archers, get some Eagle Claw Bolt Throwers, get more archers, get 1 hero of each type, or at least get a mage, get a noble or handmaiden. I would actually get both, but I just don't have the influence right now to get a handmaiden right here. Get heroes that are easily available, get those in every single army that you can, and mass armies like this. That is the most efficient way to use the limited resources that you have in a campaign. Everything else, you can do many other things, but you'll have fewer armies, and individually, sure, they might be much stronger than other armies, but you almost never need extremely powerful individual armies. And in fact, even if you're encountering a really powerful foe that might have a strong army, you may benefit from having numerous armies because it gives you more flexibility on the campaign map to conquer territory. Like over here, I declared war on Malekith, and because I have 4 armies, I've been able to take territories all over the place, including this region. Took that over there, took the main thrust was over here through Hag Reef. Another army came over here, And there's no way to stop this. That kind of flexibility is very important, even when you're dealing with a lot of foes. And if you do encounter a very powerful threat, you just concentrate those 4 armies and defeat them in detail. Or if you find an enemy that's in a settlement with a full stack, and then they have other 2 stacks around that settlement, like over here we can look at Nuln. Nuln has an army outside the settlement and one in the settlement. You just use one army to put the settlement under siege, and then just fight this army with 2-on-1 advantage. It might be stronger than some of the things, like it does have great swords or all that. Or if we look at this situation, right? Great swords, cannons, mortars, handgunners, pretty decent army over here. In this situation, just put this settlement under siege, encircle it, and defeat the army outside of the settlement. And then, yeah, rush the settlement, no problem. Or if you're facing off against an enemy that has significant combat advantages versus you, ambush tactics, getting allies to help you out, diplomacy is part of the game. Ambush tactics are part of the game. There is no way to argue that is an efficient use of resources to Doomstack. Like in a high level campaign, recruiting any dragon is a highly inefficient way of using resources, because every single star dragon, for instance, is worth 4 high elven archers with light armor, not the basic ones, but 4 of the ones recruiting from barracks. In fact, some people would argue it's not even worth bothering with archers with light armor. It's worth just spamming archers, regular ones, and spearmen. And that is a very efficient army. The problem, and that creates, that's also where we can talk about unit roster. There's almost no reason to bother with cavalry as high elves, because, well, your spearman and archer combo, especially if you corner camp or you use or use different formations or use terrain, like this is very effective at holding the line. They won't take a lot of damage. They're very good line holders. And while lions themselves have pretty good level of armor, they generally take more damage despite their armor. And they don't do enough damage to justify getting them. And they're more expensive as well. And your archers, your basic archers, are far better. This is something that does happen on a lot of campaigns. In a significant number of campaigns. Like one of the best armies for the dwarves that a lot of people use are basic gyrocopters. Legend has swarmed the map and annihilated entire factions with just basic gyrocopters in his legendary campaigns. Legend of Total War, that is. And other people have copied that. It's not thunder barges or gyro bombers that are crazy about dwarves. It's the basic gyrocopters, which, by the way, have been nerfed. Personally, I don't really go too far on that. I get varied armies of Quarrelers, Iron Drakes, Iron Drakes, Thunders, and some artillery. And heroes, that's what I go with. But certainly not Thunder Barges, not Gyro Bombers. If I'm ever recruiting Gyro Bombers or high-end Slayer units or anything like that in a dwarf campaign, I am just playing for the fluff. It is not necessary, it is not important, and the resources I'm spending in one high-quality army, I could spend on 2, 3, or even 4 lower-quality armies that can get the job done almost as well in the vast majority of cases. And if I do find myself in a situation where I am facing a very powerful foe, then it's, I just concentrate on my armies or various tactics I can use. Ambush them, set up ambush tactics, set up various scenarios in which I take advantage of that. The worst way, I think, to view Total War is from the perspective, it's one army versus another. No, it's your empire against the enemy empire, or against the enemy empires. It's fighting across multiple fronts in a campaign and worrying about those fronts and having the resources to deal with that. So yeah, sure, if you have an army of Savage Orcs against Doomstacks, I saw a screenshot like that on Reddit, then yeah, your Savage Orcs are going to use. But what if you had 5 armies of Savage Orcs with magic, with lords, leading every single one of them, with heroes in every single one of them, or just one hero in every single one of them? Well, suddenly the picture starts looking very different than just having one powerful army, doesn't it? Because even if on an individual level you might use, the fact that you're more efficiently using your resources is better. The problem with unit caps, by the way, is that if you look at Chaos Dwarves and Tomb Kings, it creates a dynamic in a campaign where early on, you're using very crap units, right? Skeletal Spearmen, archers, because you can get quite a few archers as Tomb Kings. You're using really bad armies, or hobgoblins for Chaos Dwarves. You can make that work. But then once you, and it is annoying to have to deal with new caps, but then you reach a point where it's like just spamming Chaos Dwarf Warriors and blunderbusses and artillery, and no army in the game can stop you. That's the problem. Unit caps don't help create variety when it actually matters in a campaign. By the time you've overcome those systems, at least the way it's implemented in the game right now, not talking about mods, the way it's implemented for Tomb Kings and Cast Dwarves, by the time you overcome the issue, well, your campaign is over. It's done. It's finished. It's GG, well played, move on, get something else done. That's kind of the situation. And so yeah, sure, you can make one really powerful army, but you will conquer the map faster with many armies of weaker units. Just the strategic flexibility, the movement range, the usage of resources, the amount of money you can save by not spending on military recruitment buildings and spending it instead on things like hero capacity. Funnily enough, your armies might become better on spending on hero capacity and just increasing that. It depends on the race you're talking about, but just economic buildings, which in turn allow you to maintain more armies, more power, as opposed to having 1 or 2 powerful armies. You can have 10 decent armies that can deal with a lot of cases, because very few armies in a campaign will be able to stop, say, something like this, right? Very, very few armies. In this campaign, none. Like, Morathi tried. Morathi was actually the biggest challenge. Morathi tried. She had a lot of Dark Shards. Funnily enough, Morathi was the biggest challenge when she was just spamming Dark Shards and Dread Spears. I think she had a couple of Black Arc Corsairs, if I remember correctly. But yeah, she did have a lot of Dark Shards. That was risky. Took casualties. That was the biggest challenge. I would not worry about dealing with Karl Franz over here. And Karl Franz is faction strength rank number 1 right now. He's the strongest faction in the campaign right now. But if we look at his individual armies, do they look like really dangerous armies? Do they look like the kind of armies that would stop you? I mean, he has Gotrek. Jeez, where is Felix? You gotta wonder where is Felix in this situation. I guess he might have attached it to another army. He didn't keep Gotrek and Felix together. For shame. Really, for shame. But you look at the individual armies that he has, and they're not especially great. It's just because he has a lot of these kind of armies. Granted, this is, if we were to wait 30 more turns, I'm sure he would start just spamming siege tanks if I entered in a war with him. I'm sure that would happen. But that's why you plan for a war. That's why you anticipate what your enemy could do, and you plan accordingly. And would I rather attack Karl Franz with an army of Star Dragons, or 4 armies of Spearmen and Archers with light armor, or Silver and Guard and Archers with light armor? You know my answer. And that is the most efficient way of resources. Also, having more armies means you get... having more armies of lower quality units means that you have more lords that are high level, that each of them can bring a great deal of combat ability themselves. Elven princes, pretty strong melee combatants, right? Elven mages, archmages, if you can't afford having a mage in every army, which, by the way, you can struggle quite a bit in high elven campaigns to do so. If you can't afford that, then yeah, an elven archmage. Decent enough combatant, not as good, obviously, but you still get that powerful magic. That's all I had to say. Costin signing out. Stay tuned for more. Unit caps and doom stacking, just a completely inefficient way of resources. And look, play however you want. But the argument that somehow doom stacking is really what the game incentivizes you, that is far from the freaking truth. It might have been the case in Warhammer 1 and 2. It certainly was the case in Warhammer 2. But it's not the case in Warhammer 3. Even with the Skaven, like, consider this. The Skaven can get access to very high tier units very early on in their campaign because of their food mechanic. But is that the most efficient way of using resources in a Skaven campaign? Not really. Like, yeah, I'm sure having Rattling Gunners and Giselles and catapults and nukes in every army sounds fun, but can you afford doing that? Well, I can tell you, having played a decent amount of Skaven campaigns, I have bankrupted myself many times more than I can count trying to do that. And that is much better to focus on having things like Nut Runners, Gut Runners, or Warp Grinders in armies and diving the variety. And having greater army variety and hero variety than just focusing on some, spamming an army of Rat Ogres and Hell Pit Abominations or Giselles and Rattling Gunners. In fact, the Rattling Gunner army and Giselle army is a horrible use of resources and very situational as well. Go see Sign out.